Development of the artistic persona. Now, what do I mean by this? Think about it. What do you imagine when you think of the artist? Are they quirky? Are they unusual? Are they all dressed in black? Or maybe bright, vivid colors? Maybe they always wear a beret on their head. What is it that makes us think of the artist or the artistic persona? Now, it's not entirely bad because sometimes when we do anything unusual or quirky, people let us off with a pass. Well, you know, she's an artist. And the roots of this are in the Renaissance and history and the ideas about creativity, and certainly our masters. When we talk about the masters like Leonardo and Titian and personality, a lot of those things have filtered down. But this idea of the artist is almost an otherworldly idea or person is certainly there sometimes. And we can largely thank Giorgio Vasari. But again, we'll talk about this more. So there are archetypes. These are types of individuals. So when you're looking at this, is there something that resonates with you? Are you typically the caregiver? Are you the person that's always taking care of everybody? Almost every family I know of has one. They're the ones that's always doing for people. The sage, the person where everyone goes to for advice. I can think of a person in my family that matches that as well. He's calm, he's tranquil, he's doesn't lose control, and he's a person that people go to for advice regularly. The explorer, maybe you are a wanderer, and you, more than anything, value freedom. So there are these different types of people. Now, most of us are a little bit of all of this, to a certain extent. But in any case, we're going to focus on the artist, the innovative artist, the creative artist. I'm going to stereotype. Doesn't always like rules. Doesn't always like to conform. Now, there are exceptions, and I know an artist that is an exception. And she's lovely, but she's very, very regimented. So artists tend to think outside the box, color outside of the lines. And so, again, forgive me if I do some generalizations, but I think some generalizations are part of the artistic persona or the idea of the artistic persona. So what is an archetype? It's, again, universally understood symbol or term or based on a prototype. In high school, I think most of us can relate to that because most of us went through it. In high school, you have the jock, you have the dippy cheerleader, you have different types of people, the nerds, and you very much get classified in high school oftentimes. So they're often part of fables, part of storytelling. I mean, what would a Disney movie be without the villain? We need a villain. So yes, these are all, of course, different archetypes. Leonardo da Vinci, when you think of the word artist, it's probably one of the things that pop into your head. So Leonardo da Vinci, Renaissance artist, Renaissance man, talented in so many things. So Leonardo da Vinci, 15th century to 16th century, and of course some of the most iconic artworks in history are from Leonardo da Vinci. Mona Lisa, The Last Supper, more recently Salvator Mundi, sold for $450 million, still holds the record last that I checked. And I do check fairly often. So Giorgio Vasari is kind of sort of one of the first art historians. He wrote Lives of the Artist, and he said that heaven sometimes sends us beings who represent not humanity alone, but divinity itself, taking them as our models and imitating them, elevating us to the highest celestial sphere. And this is that idea of inspiration or a spirit that basically comes upon the artist, and the artist kind of creates something that's almost outside of themselves. And so Vasari certainly wrote a great deal about many artists, some of which is maybe a little bit of storytelling, and some of it we do think is accurate. But even so, Vasari is kind of a big deal in art history. So it's certainly a name to be understood. He was an artist himself, but not particularly an artist of any particular note, but he's very, very well recognized as being important as one of the first biographers and people that were interested in the backstory of the artist. So he was gifted for his drawings, paintings, again, very inventive. His imagination really knew no bounds. Natural curiosity about everything, tended to be slow to finish projects. Something else would interest him. Do I think he probably had ADHD? Almost certainly. So tremendously admired then and now, and he fascinates us. We also think that he was dyslexic because he wrote backwards, mirror image. And so there's a lot of his writings where he's writing mirror image, and it's really amazing to see. So interested in different expressions, really studied faces and humanist ideas. This is a quote from Vasari. But the greatest of all Andrea, he's talking about Verrocchio, pupils was Leonardo da Vinci, in whom, besides a beauty of person never sufficiently admired and a wonderful grace in all of his actions, there was such a power of intellect that whatever he turned his mind to, he made himself a master of with ease. So he was brilliant. That's been pretty clear across the board. And yet they also acknowledged that he had a tendency not to finish things or to take a long time to finish things. In erudition and letters, he would have distinguished himself if he had not been variable and unstable. For he set himself to learn many things, and when he began to give them up in arithmetic during the few times that he applied himself, he made progress, and he often perplexed his master by the doubts and difficulties that he propounded. He wasn't an easy student. He gave some time to the study of music and learned to play on the lute, improvising songs most divinely. He applied himself, but he never laid aside time for drawing and modeling in relief, sculpture. And so, and this is from Vasari again. So he's acknowledging that he's brilliant, but he's also acknowledging that focus was a problem for him. So Lives of the Artist is still in print today. He was born in Arezzo, Italy. He was a Mannerist painter, but again, we know him best as an art historian. He's also working for the powerful Medici, so he's really moving in really pretty wonderful elite circumstances and circles. So he was a painter and architect as well. And so Vasari, Lives of the Artist. Interestingly enough, it's the very, very first art history book that I bought. I was studying English literature. I was going to teach English lit. I was on that path. I took my first art history class. I don't think it took very long before I walked to admin and changed my major. It was done very, very quickly. And it was funny because I had very little left. until I graduated in art, English Lit. But education's never wasted. I always tell my daughters that. But in any case, so Vasari, Lives of the Artist, important, but understand that not all of it is true because he could be a story.
This is Verrocchio's Baptism of Christ. So David is believed to be modeled after Leonardo da Vinci, who was apprenticing in Verrocchio's studio. So story goes that Leonardo worked upon this particular angel in the corner, and he worked on particularly on the clothes. And although he was very young, Verrocchio basically acknowledged that his work was better and that never again did he touch colors again, being angry a boy should know more than he. Do I think this is a myth? Yes, I do. Is there a similar story about Picasso's father? Picasso's father, who had worked in the arts and was also an artist, taught as well, and that when Picasso surpassed his skills, he put down his brushes and he never painted again. I know a lot of artists, and they don't tend to stop painting when they find somebody who's better than them. That's just kind of a fallacy. So I'm very, very hesitant to believe that. Art history is filled with this kind of stuff. But I do want you to look at that angel. And I think it is highly likely that another hand painted it. Because if you look at St. John the Baptist, who's baptizing Christ, and the Holy Spirit is coming down, you see the symbolic hands and the dove. And as he is baptizing him, just look at the folds in that blue sleeve that he has right there. And look at the angel's garb. You know, they're same color, so you can kind of see the difference in quality. There is a higher level of quality in the angel's garb in this particular work. So is that possible that he did indeed paint that angel? Yes. Also look at the face. I think it's a really good possibility that is a Da Vinci face. It looks quite different than the other angel, for instance. So in any case, some of these stories are great, but approach some of them with a certain level of skepticism. You have to really, really be careful of the source. And Vasari is sometimes questionable. So this is probably the young face of Leonardo da Vinci. He would have been in his studio. He could easily have been a model. He would have been in his 20s. A very attractive young man, a confident man, and you see that in this particular work, very much so. So commissioned by the Medicis. This is David and Goliath. David, of course, slays Goliath, and here is this young boy who slays this giant basically because God was with him. So contrapposto, weight shift, is something you see in all three of these. So you have the contrapposto in Aphrodite of Knidos, and that slight S curve. You also see it in Michelangelo's David, and then you also see it in Verrocchio's David, which was earlier. The theme of David was definitely a popular theme, a biblical theme that was quite popular. Mona Lisa, of course, she is iconic, and she is part of Leonardo da Vinci's story as well. It's said that it's well documented. It was one of his favorite paintings, said to have gone with him on his travels. It was commissioned. It was a commission. Did he give another copy to the patron? Perhaps. Again, I have almost half a lecture on just the Mona Lisa. And the Mona Lisa is believed to be Lisa Gherardini, and the nickname is La Gioconda, and her husband was a merchant. He had some means. It said that that mysterious smile might be towards the artist. It might be towards the supposedly musicians were hired to play to entertain her while she set for this work. So maybe she's smiling at them. The eyebrows, or almost non-existent eyebrows, that was a fashion of the time period. And then there's a slight bridal veil if you look at it real close. And some have thought maybe it this veil may denote that she was pregnant. So again, you have to look really, really close. It has this fine, fine, fine layer over it. So maybe it again is denoting this young woman, or maybe it indeed is denoting that she was pregnant. So I kind of think that is possible, because she does have a rather matronly look to her. I love the hands. The perspective is remarkable in this. This is one of the things of which he's famous, is that perspective and that smoky background, that sfumato background. This was signature Leonardo. So certainly one of his most famous works, and also famous because it was stolen. Works that get stolen are often works that become famous. It's one of the reasons why the Scream is so famous. It was stolen as well. Leonardo da Vinci's great masterpiece in Milan. This is a fresco. It's very large. It's in a dining hall. And he was experimenting with fresco painting and with pigments, and it wasn't even stable in his lifetime. So even in his lifetime, it was degrading. It is said to be virtually completely restored with other people's hands, and no longer the hand of Leonardo da Vinci. Did he still design it? Well, yeah. Do I think it's still essentially still a Leonardo? Well, yeah, I rather do. But even so, it has been restored a great deal. You have Christ in the center. You have perspective going in behind him, a vanishing point behind the head of Christ, who sits center. In Christian doctrine, of course, the Last Supper is important. It's a serving of bread and wine, and it's symbolic, of course, for the blood of Christ and the body of Christ, the wine and the bread. And it's also that pivotal moment when he says, "One of you will betray me," and they're all kind of stunned, and it's about prophecy too, because he knows this is going to happen. It's part of the chain of events that's going to happen, and there's this moment of surprise. They're like, who, me? Or looking around, and they're startled, and the figure of Judas, it said, took a long time for Da Vinci to even find a figure, a model that he felt looked evil enough for Judas. And so the figure that is just off the middle, dark hair, smaller stature, pointy beard, and he's kind of leaning back, and he has an olive color tunic. That is, of course, Judas. And Judas also is holding a bag of money. And then right next to Christ, you have John the Evangelist. No, it is not Mary of Magdalene. The Da Vinci Code is complete fiction. Now, but it looks like a woman. Now, it looks like a very attractive Italian male. And indeed, biblically, he said he was very, very fair of face. He was one of Christ's favorites. Indeed, the task of taking care of his mother after his death goes to the evangelist. And it is, there's a lot going on. One of the things that's interesting is it's grouped in triangles. You have 4 different triangles of apostles. Very linear and certainly appropriate in a dining hall. This has been through so much. At one point in time, they actually had farm animals in this particular area of the building. And it also sustained a bomb and wasn't destroyed. So it has been through a lot, but it still is here over 500 years later. Leonardo envisioned air flight, the idea of helicopters, the idea of flying fascinated him. Indeed, the flight of birds. Again, didn't even want to see them caged. He would release them. And so he was interested in all kinds of things. Again, he was a true Renaissance man. So Vasari wrote he was a kind and thoughtful man. And so he also was vegetarian. He asserted that we are animals and we do not have any God-given right to eat our fellow creatures. In this day and time, this was highly unusual. Today, not so highly unusual, but very highly unusual in his time. Here's some examples of his connections to gliders and wings, and again, so many different inventions. Even kind of visualize this idea of a repeating a rifle or repeating a weapon. If you ever have a chance to go to Leonardo da Vinci exhibition that talks about his inventions, they're fascinating. I did go to one in Rome, and I went to another one, but I can't for the life of me remember what city. Titian. Titian is one of the first internationally known artists. Venetian artist, popular artist. His works were very much sought after. And Titian, this is a portrait of Titian by Agostino Carracci. He's a Renaissance artist as well. And certainly a number of the masters are part of this development of the artistic persona. But in Titian's case, he becomes a symbol more of colore, rich color. He is driven by color. Matisse was driven by colors, particularly the color red. Michelangelo was more interested in draftsmanship, in drawing, and actually in sculpture more than painting as well. Even so, he was commissioned to do the Sistine Chapel, and when the Pope asks you to do something, well, you often do it. Mind you, they went head to head and had quite a few conflicts during the years that it was being produced. But even so, his first love was sculpture. So according to Vasari, who was Florentine, yes, there's some biases there, Tuscan artist revived disegno, draftsmanship, drawing, and art was reborn. According to Lodovico Dolce, Venetian artists gradually softened their coloring until their manner equaled nature, which means it looked realistic, it looked real. Rather than beginning with careful drawings, Venetian painters often work out compositions directly on the canvas, and then often using layers of colored brush strokes to basically start to define the form. Layer upon layer of oil paints can do that. Now, Caravaggio, for instance, is believed to have gone straight to canvas because we have no drawings. We have no drawings of Caravaggio. So he described Disegno as the father and foundation of all the visual arts, the animating principle of all creative processes. But there's plenty of artists that basically go straight to paint and don't draw first. So in any case, it's an argument in art. And then there's also the argument of what's more important, sculpture or paint. Again, it's opinion. Both answers are right to a certain degree. So design, Michelangelo's study for Adam and the center panel for the creation of Adam, and then the Titian's gorgeous Assumption of the Virgin when she's being essentially after her death, she's going to heaven. And so you see the angels, you see the apostles, you see the God and the Holy Spirit and the heavens opening up. And so very, very active, very colorful, very rich in detail. So both are masterpieces. I mean, the creation of Adam is the center panel for the Sistine Chapel. And of course, almost everyone recognizes that panel. Titian's Bacchus, or Dionysus to the Greeks, and Ariadne, early work, rather magical. It prefaces the Baroque, where there's going to be swirling fabrication like this. Sense of movement, it's dramatic. He was the god of everything delicious, wine, women, revelry. Here you have dancing maenads, and you have satyrs, which are half goat and half men. So these kind of wild men. Ariadne has been rejected from her lover, and Bacchus arrives to save the day. That's this heroic moment. And what's with all the nakedness? Well, the Greco-Roman aesthetic is the heroic nude, and you see it in sculpture, you certainly see it in paintings, and again, it's this classical style. And the Renaissance, it means rebirth. It looks back to the classical past. It also was inspired by a lot of the things that were being unearthed, one of which was the Laocoon. And this is at the Vatican. It's practically one of the first things you see on one of the museum tours. And it's right before you enter the actual building, kind of in a protected courtyard area. But supposedly Michelangelo was there when it was unearthed, and that was part of his great inspiration, which I think you can see that. Now the Trojan priest has his young male boys next to them, and they of course are being attacked by serpents because they upset the gods. And the young boys don't particularly look like young boys. They look like a miniature of the father. So they don't quite have that down in, at least in this Hellenistic moment. But even so, it's gorgeous work, and it also inspires the Baroque, which the Baroque follows the Renaissance. Titian's Rape of Europa. Zeus was known to seduce women. He came to Leda as a swan, and he comes to Europa as a decorated bull. So he has flowers and vines on him, and he looks beautiful, and these women bathing on the beach see him, and they find him appealing, and so Europa gets close to him, and he steals her away and takes her away. Now, in this time period, rape and seduction can be used interchangeably in art history. Not so much now, certainly, but again, the rape or seduction of Europa is, again, what it's inferring, but it's certainly both. And then you also have the putti in the sky, the angels, the puto in the sky, these little fat cherubs. And of course, cherubs are associated with Aphrodite, Cupid in particular, Eros. And I don't know about you ladies, but I don't care how decorated a bull gets. I'm not going to get anywhere near a bull. But they do. That's the story. It's mythology. Just kind of go with it. So here it is, a closer detail of it. It's just a beautiful, beautiful work. But when I think of Titian, I think of this work, Venus of Urbino. It's an iconic work. It's a notable work. It's probably one of the top works most people think of when they think of painting. And this is a Renaissance work. Here you see Venus, the goddess of love, sensuality, and this is believed to be a marriage portrait, probably basically commissioned for the event of an important marriage, which there's some irony here because Venus was anything but faithful, and yet there's the symbol of that faithful dog at her feet, but she wasn't faithful. She had a lot of lovers, and so we also have her maidservants in the background. They're digging around in cassone. These are chests. They would have had tapestries on the walls to insulate these large palaces to keep them warm. I mean, certainly they would have fires and fireplaces, but it still could get cold. And she has that Titian color hair, that reddish blonde hair that was very popular. And she's holding roses, which are also attributed to Venus. Sometimes she also is holding a mirror to symbolize her beauty. Roses ultimately also become a symbol for the Virgin in art history as well. Let's see, other things. She has a very demure pose, a very sweet pose, and then she's covering her genitals, and we actually call this the Venus pudica pose, especially when she's standing up in that pose. And so it's this delicate, modest pose. And then here are some of the careful details of it. Beautiful, beautiful work. Guidobaldo II della Rovere, who was awaiting delivery of this painting to Urbino, the city of Urbino, in 1538. He may have ordered it some years earlier to judge by his relative impatience to have it, to celebrate his marriage of 1534. So missed that date a little bit. But it's also my understanding that as far as the fee, that it was slow to be paid for. Titian is also believed to have worked on this work, and this is the work of Giorgione. Giorgione was also an important artist, and one of those first people that Vasari writes about as being an important artist, and unfortunately not fully developing as an artist because of an early tragic death. And this idea of tragedy and drama that surrounds a lot of these artists is certainly part of the history of art and the development of the artist as well. So this is Sleeping Venus. The figure type would have been what was typical for this time period. You have this background, Italian background, and the warm tones, and you have this kind of framing of this beautiful blankets and this rich red pillow behind her as well. And so Sleeping Venus, again, was believed to have been finished by Titian. Dürer produced a great many number of self-portraits. Was he a narcissist? Possibly. Was he confident? Absolutely. Was he extremely skilled? And this is just yet another way of him demonstrating his skills. Yes, just an extremely a well-known artist. He did attain popularity in his time period, but I love the fact that he presents himself as creator, artist, creator, essentially almost God. And so you have Durer's monogram on one side and his signature on the other. He signs his name very, very directly. You cannot miss it. It's not delicately in the corner. No, it's right there. It's very, very confident in its execution. And so, yes, here I have Raphael's beautiful and iconic Christ. And so you can see Christ blessing. His hand is up in a blessing. And then you can compare it to Durer's work as well. So he shows himself as a Christ figure, but why? And this is a Stockstad. Durer perceived the artist as something of a creator. Durer was known as sometimes a difficult personality. Much is known about the life personality of thinking of Durer. In fact, his work tells us a bit about him. He was studious, he was analytical, observant, meticulous, but as self-absorbed or more as Michelangelo. But with a talent such as Durer or Michelangelo, who could completely blame them. So in many ways, the artist fits the stereotype of the artistic, creative genius. And he's young and good looking as well, and he knew it. So this is a self-portrait with landscape. He also loved fashion. He puts himself in some pretty unique costumes. This is an early example of his work, a self-portrait of himself as a child. So we know he had early skills that were very prevalent, very strong. This almost looks like I have a headache. But yes, these are, he did a number of self-portraits, and he's experimenting with facial expressions in the same way that Leonardo did as well. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, possibly Durer's most important work, late 1400s. The work is active, frenzied, dramatic, has so much detail, and so much that draws the eye. Now, the benefit of prints is that they can be widely circulated, different than a painting. And so these prints went far and wide. Now, it's important that you get the background of it. And this is from Revelations. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as if it was the noise of thunder, one of the four beasts saying, "Come and see." And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him. And he went forth conquering and to conquer. And when he opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, "Come and see." And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, "Come and see." And I beheld, and lo, a black horse. And he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard the voice in the midst of the four beasts say, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny." In any case, it is very, very, very symbolic. And a lot of times when there's a lot of debate about, is Revelations literal? Is it allegorical, symbolic? What's going on here? And so the artist, of course, can have their own interpretation. There's artistic license here as well. So some things get taken, some things get left behind. But whenever you're looking at a Christian work or a Buddhist work or a work that has a mythological background, it's always a good idea to kind of get the backstory as well. And his name that sat upon him was Death, and hell followed with him, and power was given to them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. And I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God, and for the testimony that they held. Now this is from the King James Version. I decided to get as close as possible to the timing of Albrecht Dürer. So here you see some of the details pulled out so you can discern them a little easier. Actually trimmed them and pasted them. So Death is hard to miss. He's in the bottom. He looks a tad ruthless and insane. Famine or Plague is holding the weighing scales behind him. And he looks, again, thicker and solid. So this is four horses of the apocalypse, four horsemen of the apocalypse. And you can see I've pulled them out. So the one in the bottom is Death. And again, you see them just going straight over the people. They're ruthless. And then you have Famine or Plague. The weighing scales are flying behind him. Again, there's so much movement in this particular print. The allegory of war is present here as well. And so it's a unique work, and it was a time of great superstition and certainly religious. And so something like this would have been fairly easily discerned by the viewer of that period. Now, the fear of plague was very real. Black Death swept through Asia and Europe in the mid-1400s. It also had periods in the 1500s. The plague annihilated families, sometimes whole communities. There's estimates the Black Death may have halved the population of Europe. It's believed to have originated in China. It was spread by flea-infested rats on ships. There was no awareness, only ignorance about the spread of plague. So superstition and religious prejudice was rampant. European Jews were accused of poisoning wells and were massacred as a result. So horrendous anti-Semitism as well. Now, printmaking could also produce less sinister prints as well. This is called Melancholia. And it has the little banner in the background that says Melancholia. It also can possibly be related to artistic production. You see this angel that resembles Dürer quite a bit, and yet she also appears to be female. So she's this androgynous personification of melancholia or artistry, or some have thought that this print is more about geometry. In other words, they're not entirely sure. Now, the infant is sitting there writing as if it's perhaps a young artist versus an older, more jaded artist. And this was a work that was also widely circulated. Now, it's said that it is very, very symbolic too of the four humors, or the four temperaments. Melancholy was associated with sadness and the elk. Choleric was associated with the cat. Phlegmatic personality was associated with the ox. Sensualness associated with the rabbit. And you wanted things in balance. You didn't want to have one too much of anything. It should be all balanced as far as these fluids that make up the human body. Black bile for liver, for despair and greed. Yellow bile associated with anger. Phlegm, lungs, tiredness, lack of emotion, again, bit depressed, and blood red, optimism, the flesh. The mouse was a symbol of Satan. Remember the mousetrap in the portrait of Joseph on the maraud Merode altarpiece. Parrot, a symbol of false wisdom, false pride, beauty, vanity. False wisdom because it only can repeat things. There's no original thought. Dürer signs his full name and hangs it on the tree. Like Jan van Eyck, his signature is clear and present. The artist is important. Now let's simplify things here. I gave you a lot of information. The temperaments, personality types were sanguine, easygoing, choleric, cranky, angry, phlegmatic, steady, reliable, and melancholic, depressive. But they really believed this, and they believed that bloodletting could actually rebalance sick individuals or kill you quicker. There's a magic square. The magic square, the columns, rows, and diagonals all add up to 34. This was kind of a popular puzzle picture thing. The date of the actual print is on the very bottom, in the center, 1514. Now, Vasari considered Dürer a Northern Renaissance wonder. He thought he was incredible. But the details are so remarkable. You have an hourglass, time passes away. You have those weighing scales in the background as well, just as they showed up also in the prior print. You also have what some believe is a greyhound kind of asleep there. And then you also have this kind of geometric figure, and you have this kind of a ball that, symbolic of the world. You have nails and carpentry tools and molds underneath in the foreground. The nails have been arranged. Some say that's a symbol of Christianity because there is a cross that is basically shown. Some have said that the background with may represent 1490s. There was a meteorite that it's believed he saw. So perhaps that is what you're seeing in the background. Oh, a lot of mystery surrounds this work. So this is a mandala style of work. This is actually a decorative pattern of knots, round, intertwined patterns with an empty disc in the center, which has his monogram, again, the artist center right there. And then there's 4 corner single knots with ornamental foliage as well. So this was a woodcut. He did a series of 6 of these. This is at the British Museum. So mandalas, magic circles found in the writings of virtually all cultures, important representation of self, way the self has been described in different religions, and it's a tool for self-realization, meditation. It's used in all different types of things, and again, it's multicultural. Here's another example, slightly different. And with Dürer, there was a real interest in the natural world, an interest in drawing with accuracy, extreme detail, and some of his images of animals and creatures are amazing. Sea crab, 1495. And Dürer's The Hare, 1502. And some of these are really quite famous, and if you ever get an opportunity to see some of these, they're very, very fragile, so they're not often on display. But again, the detail is just meticulous. There was an interest in the exotic. This is a rhinoceros, or their vision of a rhinoceros. Now, mind you, they didn't have the San Diego Zoo that they could go to and get a really, really good sketch of these creatures. So sometimes the information wasn't firsthand, and so sometimes the creatures look pretty fantastical. They look even more fantastical when Salvador Dali comes along and does his version of Albrecht Dürer's famous print. So this is 1950s, a sculpture that was completely inspired by Albrecht Dürer's rhinoceros. And Now, Salvador Dali, surrealist, interested in dream imagery, imagination, very individualistic. As far as artist goes, he was out there. This idea of the artist having a quirky personality and doing unusual things, certainly one of the masters of all of this is Salvador Dali. And so Portrait of Salvador Dali by Philippe Halsman. He also promoted this personality, this larger-than-life personality of Salvador Dali. Again, intense personality. Born in Spain, natural talent at an early age, influenced by Freud and Jungian psychology, interest in dream imagery, photorealistic painting, hyper detail. Developed the ideas of the paranoid critical method. To hear it explained is complicated. Almost a hallucinatory state to see images and explore the subconscious. This idea of all those things that are swirling in your head right before you go to sleep and right when you wake up, those were the sort of things the surrealists were interested in painting. He was fascinated by rhinoceri. He had two. And so he had a black rhinoceros and a white rhinoceros. And so Salvador Dali had a great big personality and really, really was a marketing genius. They just didn't know what he was going to do next. I mean, when he shows up to speak and the car is filled with cauliflower, or when he was dressed in a wetsuit and he has this heavy head covering and he couldn't breathe and he's jumping around and people thought it was part of his performance, kind of a Dada performance, and he was suffocating. So finally somebody thought, maybe this isn't part of this, and helped him, and he didn't die, obviously, but led a nice long life. And again, he was produced a huge amount of artworks, and the whole idea of the quirky, unpredictable, wild artist, there are bits of Salvador Dali in this idea. So here we also have a banner of Vermeer's The Lace Maker, and a rhinoceros, and this was at Vicente's zoo in Paris. And he's sitting on a wheelbarrow, and he is painting a rhinoceros's horn. So you would think he'd be doing something with the Vermeer work, but no. The Vermeer's Lace Maker is one of his favorite works. So first exhibited at age 14, artist from an early age. His mother dies when he's 16, and not much later, his father marries his aunt. Ew. Expelled from school in 1923, he criticized the professors. He did not lack for confidence. He could be very arrogant. 1925, first official solo exhibition. 1926, Paris meets Picasso, and he's experiencing the Paris art scene. He was in military service. He makes a film, made a few short films, and in 1930s develops the paranoid critical method. I think some of his best works were produced in the 30s. Salvador Dali was the second Salvador Dali. His brother died before he was born at 22 months. He was even told he was his brother reincarnated at a young age. Yeah, that won't mess him up at all. So perhaps he had reason for some of his unusual behavior. When people are free to do as they please, they usually imitate each other. It's a quote from Eric Hoffer. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio. This is a portrait by Ottavio Leone. An artist affects eternity. He can never tell where his influence will stop. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, Conversion of St. Paul. This is at the Cerasi Chapel at Santa Maria del Popolo in Rome. The first time I went to Rome, I went to see it, and it was being cleaned. So I had to go back, of course. And it's a remarkable work. It's foreshortened. The figure almost looks awkward to us, but he brings the viewer in, makes it up close and personal. There's a spotty spiritual light, and it's this dramatic moment where Saul becomes Paul. The soldier Saul was aggressively against Christ, and he has this spiritual moment where he is thrown from a horse, and a voice says, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And Saul has a moment of transition. He's blinded for 3 days. 3 is kind of an important number in the Bible. 3, 7, 12. There's certain numbers that seem to recur. 3, the Trinity, for instance. So 3 days before his eyesight was restored. And his eyesight becomes restored because he becomes spiritually renewed. So he's also one of the soldiers that spiritually, that tormented Saint Stephen, and he's the one that is often shown in art with arrows coming out of him. A very tragic figure in art history. And so he becomes an important apostle, the Apostle Paul, a follower of Christ, after being one who persecutes the Christians. After he's been thrown from this horse, and he's in a vulnerable position because look at that hoof, it can come down any moment. A servant is yanking down on the halter of that horse, which is a way you control a horse when there's this flash of light, and this soldier gets tossed from this horse, and there's this conversion experience. You'd want to try to control the horse from what was going on. And so it's a remarkable work. Warm colors, this piebald horse, this spotty spiritual light that's not entirely realistic, but it's very interesting. Now, Caravaggio was the epitome of this wild artistic persona. He was a brawler. He liked to drink. He liked to party. He would get in trouble with the law. He'd sometimes have to leave the city. So he's archetypal, the hothead artist. So Jesus was mysteriously identified with people the loving group of people Saul had been running down like criminals. Jesus, he saw, was the mysterious fulfillment of all he had been blindly pursuing. And this is from an American Catholic site. And this is a close detail of the work. He is known for his incredible naturalism, often dirty feet, and he was sometimes criticized for this naturalism that was too natural, perhaps, maybe not pretty enough, and the realism is unbelievable. Caravaggio, Boy with Basket of Fruit, 1590s. This is at the Galleria Borghese in Rome. If you ever go, get a reservation before. It's a not to be missed place. One of his early works, created right after he arrives in Rome. One art historian famously and very, very rudely called this fruit with fruit. Caravaggio is believed to be either homosexual or bisexual, but certainly, again, pretty negative title. The Italian male skin looks gorgeous, it looks sensuous, and there's no denying the rather erotic quality. And this was very much recognized then and now. The half to three-quarter view figure that brings the viewer in, this is something that the Caravaggisti did quite a bit. That brown tonal background, that sharp chiaroscuro, light-dark contrast was part of his oeuvre or his style, and incredible realism. Now, This is an early work. So, for instance, the light-dark contrast is not quite as developed as it's going to get later. It's still beautiful, though. And you see, again, this beautiful still life as well. So, a cheap model, the mirror. There is some thought that oftentimes he was the model. And so in the figure in the back of the musicians, yes, absolutely. But there also is David and Goliath, the head of Goliath, also a self-portrait. So again, he was often very, very poor. Only when he starts getting commissions from the church does he start to become a person of some means. Caravaggio's St. Matthew and the Angel, 1602, commissioned by the Roman Catholic Church, not accepted since it was too informal. They hated the dirty feet. They thought that St. Matthew looked dumb and did not like the kind of earthy quality that he has, and he doesn't look elegant enough. You know, this is an important apostle. So in any case, no, they weren't pleased. So he does another version. Now, careful naturalism is a hallmark of the Caravaggisti and Caravaggio. Caravaggio, again, known for these dirty feet, which, again, the apostles and the pilgrims are moving around quite a bit, so I think dirty feet would have gone with it. But again, not always well received initially, but most things in art that are changed are not received well initially. So here we see a black and white rendition of the work, and then we also have it recolored. This work is no longer extant. It no longer exists because of a fire. So they've had to have some conjecture of what it must have looked like. So he produced another version. This is Caravaggio, St. Matthew and the Angel. There's a sense of movement. There's a sense of the Baroque, the swirling garments. You know, almost looks like wind is moving through. And here you have, this is displayed at St. Luigi dei Franceschi, the French church in Rome, not too far from the Pantheon. And it's a sensational museum. The art is incredible in it. And it also includes the famous Calling of St. Matthew as well. And so, again, here is Caravaggio's St. Matthew and the Angel. And they liked this one. The angel looks more elegant, not nearly so sensuous. The apostle, his feet are longer and more elegant and not as dirty, and he's definitely more distinguished looking. Which one do I prefer? Absolutely, positively the first one. But again, it's taste, and it's okay either way. They're both beautiful. And so, and they're both examples of Italian Baroque. But again, the first one, you could see how the angel, you can see the belly button, and those garments are maybe a little too sheer for a church environment. I kind of get that. And then here you can see in situ, in place, the St. Matthew and the Angel. Now remember that temper I was telling you about? There's evidence that Caravaggio killed a rival in a botched attempt to castrate him. For almost 400 years, historians have asserted Caravaggio, who painted a number of Baroque masterpieces, murdered Tomasone in 1606 in a row over a tennis match. Andrew Graham Dixon, a leading art historian, disclosed that the killing followed a dispute over Felide Meladrone, a female prostitute. So Tomasone, a pimp, may have died when Caravaggio attempted to cut off his testicles. They also think today that it's entirely possible that Caravaggio is suffering from white lead poisoning, and that may have contributed to his crazy behavior. There's some thought that Van Gogh may have also suffered from a similar condition. Certainly, it's possible. And there is a documentary on Caravaggio on YouTube if you're so interested. It's pretty interesting. And so it's only a few years old. So Tomasone, a pimp, they were fighting probably over this young woman. So this may not, the events of Caravaggio and Tomasone may have included a fight about a woman as well. I don't think there's any big surprise that there was more to the story. And so certainly a possibility. Now, St. Catherine of Alexandria was tortured on a wheel. And so she's a 3rd century saint born, you guessed it, in Alexandria. A noble and illustrious family, some say of royal blood. The rich legend that was widely circulated that before she was baptized, she had a dream. In it, she saw the Virgin Mary holding the Christ child in his arms. The Virgin asked Jesus to take Catherine as a servant, but the child awoke, and Catherine, who was famous for her beauty and her learning, began to wonder how to please the divine child, and found no peace until she was baptized. After her baptism, Christ appeared to her again in a dream and took her as his celestial spouse. He put a ring on her finger, which the saint found upon awakening and which she kept for the rest of her life. At this time, Maximum II, who shared the crown with Constantine the Great, and Licinius selected Alexandria as the capital. He pledged himself to the persecution of all Christians and ordered the massacre of all who refused to sacrifice to the gods. Catherine, dedicated to preaching the faith, determined to see the emperor and open his eyes to his cruelty. She delivered a learned speech, and the emperor was taken aback and decided to gather the most famous philosophers to refute her teachings. Plus, it was a woman, so didn't want to listen to a woman. Catherine accepted the challenge, and her eloquence and intelligence converted the philosophers to her faith. Enraged, the emperor had the wise men beheaded and imprisoned Catherine in a dungeon where he sought to starve her into submission. Angels brought her food, and she succeeded in converting the wife of the emperor and all her retinue. This really ticked him off, and overcome by her serene beauty, he offered to make Catherine his wife and empress of the world, but she refused him. In a final burst of rage, he ordered her to be bound between 4 wheels, rimmed with spikes, and torn to death. So it goes on, but in any case, she was tortured. Signs and symbols in Christian art, Ferguson, there's several printings of this, kind of a art history basis, a basic text, and it has a lot of really good information about the different saints and a lot of the symbols, and again, kind of a classic. And let me move on. So Caravaggio, Judith beheading Holofernes, 1590s. So again, he had a violent personality, and a lot of the things he liked to paint were pretty violent as well. And certainly beheadings are a thing with Caravaggio. This is Judith beheading Holofernes. She beheads the Assyrian king to basically save her people. And she gets him drunk and takes advantage of him, and he doesn't fare too well. And then ultimately they take the head and take it back to the camp, and of course her people prevail. Vincent van Gogh, the passionate, intense, archetypal artist. And so certainly a lot of the drama that you have in Caravaggio seems also familiar when we think of Vincent van Gogh. It also seems familiar when we talk about the notorious Jackson Pollock. Quite the temper, a brawler, didn't do well in school, always fighting with people. That was Pollock. So Vincent and Theo van Gogh, his brother, this was his younger brother, and Anna and Theodorus had a child named Vincent William, stillborn exactly a year before Van Gogh was born. It was a family name, so when Vincent van Gogh was born, they had another child named Vincent van Gogh. And just like Salvador Dali, it produced a kind of interesting personality. I think it's hard on a child when they're named after a dead child, and especially one that was right before them like that. Vincent van Gogh, Mulberry Tree, Norton Simon Museum. It's not very big. You'd be surprised how small this is. 1889, thick application of paint, frenzied, active. You could make some argument that some of that is what's going on in his life, but it's also his artistic style. The swirls and the gestures and that thick application of paint is very much part of Van Gogh. His later work, not his early work, his early work is brownish and more thin. Starry Night over the Rhone looks a lot like his more famous Starry Night. Post-Impressionist, and often it seems to me night is even more richly colored than day. And of course, Starry Night also has some of these same qualities. But his brushwork is gorgeous. Post-Impressionist, this is important. There's one thing I like people to get. His colors are richer, they're darker, they're deeper, and his brushwork is much more active. He's a post-impressionist. You have complementary colors, these dazzling stars. The bright yellow sparking of the Starry Night may be related to the digitalis that he was actually taking while he was institutionalized. So he's an expressionist as well, and there's quite a bit of that in his work. Jackson Pollock, married to the artist Lee Krasner, abstract expressionist, New York School, active, gestural, sense of movement, reclusive, volatile, known to be difficult, had a major problem with alcohol, died at 44 from drunk driving. 2 ladies were with him, 1 died. And born in Cody, Wyoming, to a working class family, but a brawler. This was a fighter, and he had quite the temper. He's a works progress administration artist, and so had some financial support that helped him continue to be a painter. Let's see. People tend to say my 5-year-old can do it. I've taught 5-year-olds. Your 5-year-old can't do this. Maybe on a small scale. But these are large scale works, and they're often put on the floor. So active, gestural. He's listening to jazz music while he's producing it. Very individualistic, and he's the first one to do this. If you or I do this, not so exciting. He was the first one to do it, and that makes it important. My painting does not come from an easel. I prefer to tack the unstretched canvas to the hard wall or the floor. I need the resistance of a hard surface. On the floor, I'm at ease. I feel nearer, more part of the painting, since this way I can walk around it, walk from the 4 sides, and literally be in the painting. This is 1947, an early drip painting. He was also nicknamed Jack the Dripper. Full Fathom 5. 1947, New York MoMA, and this work is very active, and I love the colors in it. It does have that look of the sea to it. The title was suggested by Pollock's neighbor, and it actually comes from William Shakespeare's The Tempest. Ariel describes death by shipwreck. Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Includes nails, tacks, buttons, coins, things that fell out of his pockets while he is doing his thing. And Lee Krasner often named his works as well. When he'd name them, they were often just numbers. Number 31, MoMA, New York, 1950. So he struggled with alcoholism. He conquered it for a while, but he went back to it. And then, again, one of the passengers that was with him was killed. And then the other passenger was a woman that he was having an affair with, Ruth Kligman. After his demise, his widow, Lee Krasner, managed his estate and ensured his reputation remained strong. Understatement. She promoted it. And he had been in Life magazine, so she was able to really increase his popularity. She doesn't get the attention she deserves, though. Mapplethorpe, self-portrait. Here we have an artist all dressed in black, just like Pollock. Pollock was often all in black as well. Archetypal artist confronts the viewer. He knows his death is imminent. He suffered from AIDS. Memento mori, a reminder of death, a vanitous image. And again, he confronts the viewer. Powerful photographer, skilled photographer, controversial photographer. In the 80s, people had a lot of homophobia. They were afraid of AIDS. They were afraid kissing was going to give them AIDS. On the floor of the Senate, Jesse Helms lambasted the National Endowment of the Arts for awarding grants to Mapplethorpe and Serrano for Piss Christ. In 1989, 4 months after his death, Helms sponsored a bill forbidding the National Endowment of the Arts from funding any further work that featured, among other things, homoeroticism, S&M, and individuals engaged in sex acts. It passed. So really brings into question who says what is art. And Mapplethorpe certainly was a very, very talented photographer. I don't think there's even a question. Did some of his work push the edges of what was art? Perhaps. And again, you can Google some of those images as well. This is Joe Rubberman, and this is at the Munch Museum, 1978. But his work in black and white photography is remarkable, though. He did a lot of portraiture, and this is Alice Neal, and then this is another example of his work, one of his more famous examples. But the contour line is so strong and crisp and beautiful. The human body is beautiful. Now, in Alice Neal's case, it almost looks like a death mask. This was taken shortly before she died. But I did see a gorgeous portrait exhibition at the Palm Springs Art Museum. It showed a huge number of his portraits, and it was stunning. It was an amazing exhibition. And then there are these gorgeous flowers, still lifes, and inarguably art. And so again, all of these artists have contributed to this idea of what it means to be an artist.